And good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are on this global planet. And this study is global in a number of dimensions because I've been working on this data for over 18 months now, because I was sick and tired of reading articles here and there saying, oh, so-and-so was leaving China, so therefore that's the end of China. Oh, so-and-so's going to Mexico, so-and-so's going to Vietnam. And no one is actually going out to do the in-depth investigation work to understand, okay, what is the totality of the data out there, and let the data do the talking, rather than a lot of these articles are actually fueling a lot of political talk, and that is no help to any of you businessmen out there. So let's dive into some of this data that we have unearthed in terms of the sourcing shift out of China. And I say capacity shift rather than closing down factory shift out of China, and it's a big difference. The 132 companies that I have been tracking for the last 18 months most of them have not closed their factories in China. China is not going away, and so that's the good news. And the better news is to understand why various capacity moves have gone to different countries and how that can benefit your strategy as an importer. If you're selling on Amazon, selling on other platforms around the world, should you be sourcing from suppliers from India or Vietnam, Thailand, instead of China? These are questions that you might have better insights on after looking at the data I'm about to show you. Now, here are all the companies that I have found to have publicly documented the move of capacity out of China. And surprise, surprise, most of these companies are not from the USA. This is not an American sourcing shift, even though we all think, wow, the capacity shift was driven by tariffs. That is one of 17 reasons that we have documented. And wow, if we ask, well, how many did close up in China? Of these publicly documented companies, out of 132, here are the list, and there's only 8. And only 5 of them USA. Harley-Davidson was in the process of actually setting up a factory north of Shanghai, and they ended up closing it down before they got to run at rate and moved to Thailand instead. And for the others, like the majority of the companies I'm documenting here still have factories in China. They are still working with contract manufacturers in China. So this is not a China bad news story that I'm showing you. I've documented these times of moving out of China from 2017 all the way to 2024. Now, what is the information I'm drawing my analysis on? It is on publicly made statements by C managers through annual reports and through the media. We are not relying on statements made by journalists in the media. These are actually recorded statements made by C managers of the companies, because we want to have the right data to understand what is really going on. So if we have a look at where they're moving to, a lot of the sourcing shift is going into Southeast Asia. Surprise, surprise. Not much surprise at all, because if we look at across the world, we can see that the dominant countries the sourcing shift move to, that is where I've ordering less from my contract manufacturers or my factory in China and start to order more from my contract manufacturers or factory in other countries, then Taiwan, Thailand, Vietnam, India, Mexico kind of dominate. But it's not horses for courses. The move to these countries are not all going there for the first time. The sourcing shift to India, for example, a majority of those moves to India are for the first time, whereas a majority of the moves going to Vietnam, which tends to dominate a lot of the moves, 67 out of 132, already have established contract manufacturers or factories already in Vietnam. So it's very important to understand from a strategic sourcing point of view is it costs money to move from one country to another. It costs money to actually set up a new factory in a new country. It could take many years to get the factory fully operational at the same optimised efficiency as what has been operating in China. When you consider the second tier, third tier, and fourth tier raw material supply chain that is feeding the supplier's factory. Wow. So just want you to understand that the blue moves, as you can see on this graph here, is showing the first moves to a new country. So as you can see, there's greater blue for India than there is red, whereas for Vietnam, there's greater red for Vietnam than there is blue, showing that there's greater moves to established operations in Vietnam. An example, Nike, they moved a lot of their capacity from China, going from 32% down to below 20%, and moved it to Vietnam. Did they set up new factories? Well, kind of. They just went to their 116 contract manufacturers they already are contracting with in Vietnam. No surprise there, Vietnam in the last 18 months has become the second largest exporter to the world in the textile and footwear sector, overtaking Bangladesh and second to China. Wow. So it's amazing. It's horses for courses because there are different industry sectors going to different countries. And India, we see there's a lot of electronics sector going to India. There's a lot of electronics sector going to North Vietnam, and more textile, sporting, footwear going to South Vietnam. Wow. And so if we can look at some of the individual countries, just for your information, specific countries, let's just bring it down to earth for some of the buyers that may be considering suppliers in these other countries. Well, Vietnam is not Vietnam. That's the first takeaway. North Vietnam is different from South Vietnam. And you can see that North Vietnam is generally populated more by the more high-end multinationals that are still feeding off the ecosystem, the electronics ecosystem, which is 12 hours truck ride north they've had from the border, and that is Hong Kong and Shenzhen. While whereas South Vietnam, again, as I said earlier, it's the predominance of textile footwear sourcing chains down there. And so North is different from South. Be very careful when you're thinking about, if you're sourcing sporting goods, then you want to be looking to South Vietnam, not North Vietnam, for your suppliers. And so there's little things to be aware of in terms of the specifics of different countries. And we can see that these companies, 38 out of the 67 we're documenting that moved to Vietnam, they've already established factories there. And so it's very, very interesting that even a quote by GoPro, they said, when you move out of China, there's no going back. Well, actually, your footwear manufacturer, and that is Crocs, they moved to Vietnam, but several months later, they decided, nah, that's too hard. We're going back to China. All right. So there is still a lot of movement going on both ways. But I have largely documented the moves out of China, not necessarily the moves back to China. That may leave room for another project on that. So there's your Vietnam. Now, what about Taiwan? That's a different story. And in some ways, that's more of a geopolitical story for the moves to Taiwan, where the move to Vietnam, in some ways, pushed by tariffs and things like that, but also there was a lot of incentives and the labour cost advantage that Vietnam has offered. But a lot of companies that relocated to Taiwan are Taiwanese companies, and basically they are basically just reversing what they did in the last 3 decades when the major Taiwanese brand names like Acer, ASUS, HTC forced all of their suppliers and their supply chain to go to low-cost China. Well, most of those suppliers have come back to Taiwan now, and that's what we are documenting here. Notice that a lot of these shifts are red and not blue. Wow. India, the opposite. And notable is that if we talk about the amount of capacity moved in terms of people employed in the country that they've moved to, India takes the cake. India takes first prize. And it has absorbed a lot of capacity in terms of people employed in the sourcing shift. We could see that India has the potential out of all of these countries to match China in terms of its electronics ecosystem in a decade or more. Today, maybe not, but you can see that a lot of the big multinationals are relocating to India, partly fueled by sales tax barriers. That is, if you want to sell to consumers in India, then you need to, there's import taxes, so you're better off actually making in India to sell in India. Of course, that's a great incentive, but the other, the big disincentive that's been around for the last decade or more has been the logistics system. And I can say that in a decade's time, that is likely to be different than what it is today. And you can see that will make India much more attractive going forward. And as these ecosystems build up and as the logistics gets stronger over time, we could see India as a much better option to source electronics if you are selling on Amazon in 8, 9, 10 years' time compared to today. And that's something to think about in your long-term strategy if you're sourcing from China already. Thailand. Most of the sourcing moves to Thailand, definitely in the electronics sector and automotive sector. Thailand has always been an established supply chain in that area. Mexico. Interesting. Why don't we go to Mexico? It is cheap. We're selling on Amazon in the USA. Mexico into the USA, 1 or 2 days. Why do we have to wait for 6 weeks or more? Or even if we can get a container at 5 times the cost out of the Asia Pacific, let's go to Mexico and source from Mexico. Well, again, need to be aware and develop your relationships with suppliers that have established in Mexico, because my data says that the moves to Mexico, most of them are not for the first time. Mexico also has its barriers to move to, as with any other country out of China. So be careful and be aware. And this is, Mexico has that close to market options. If you, as a platform seller in the US, find that, well, I get a supplier in Mexico because it might be cheaper. The only reason why you would source from Mexico is if you want to get it to market faster. You wouldn't go to Mexico because it's cheaper than China. You would expect to pay the same, if not more. You just want the advantage of the logistics of getting stuff from A to B, from supplier to your Amazon fulfillment service. So, horses for courses, these different countries are painting different stories in this global supply chain that we find ourselves in 2022. Okay, so and then the USA, yes, the whole promise of the Trump administration was to say, well, we're going to bring companies back to the USA because we're going to re-energize the workforce in the USA. Well, it really hasn't happened, and the wage cost in the USA is very preventative of that happening anytime soon. Interestingly, the big mistake that the USA manufacturers made, that was 2-3 decades ago, was to actually say, well, automation is too hard for us. This is back in the 80s. Let's just start outsourcing from China because it's cheaper. Whereas if they made that decision in the 80s to automate and get their SCADA and PLS system all in place, it would have been a different story today. Anyway, that is a conversation for another presentation. Let's get on to making some summaries from my presentation today. Indonesia is a bright spark in the Southeast Asian area. You may want to think about that, but the challenge again is logistics. Getting stuff from the supplier to the port to your fulfillment platform. That is still a challenge in Indonesia, as it is in other Southeast Asian countries. But Indonesia is growing, and as you can see, the move to Indonesia, especially in the textiles, footwear area, household goods, is certainly taking place. Cambodia, yes, if you're sourcing bikes, Cambodia is still there. Now remember, Cambodia always had that favoured country advantage. If you were importing from Asia into Europe, you weren't hit with taxes. Well, the EU has taken that advantage away from Cambodia, and so now Cambodia is struggling in many ways to find its comparative advantage compared to other countries in Southeast Asia. But for the most part, Cambodia has always been a huge mecca for bicycle final assembly, and a lot of Taiwanese some US bike companies are well established in Cambodia, even though they are importing materials from China, from Vietnam, from Thailand to make those bikes. Cambodia is still an option. And then we have Malaysia. Again, Malaysia is challenged in many ways, as with any other Southeast Asian country. But it is still, the wage rates in Malaysia are still not higher than China. The wage rates in China are still higher than in Malaysia. And so it definitely has its special locations down in Johor and Penang if you're looking to source from suppliers there. One big story is that one famous company that you all probably know about is the Dyson brand. Like, it's kind of like the Apple of vacuum cleaners with their air technology, like hair dryers, anything to do with air. You think of Dyson today. Well, Dyson has been making through Flextronics in Malaysia for the last 2 odd decades. They have never sourced from China, whereas Bissell, the oldest vacuum cleaner manufacturer in the world, and still privately owned as today, they're over 125 years old, they've actually moved capacity from China down to Johor to join Dyson and their manufacturing. Now, be careful when you are sourcing from these countries. Another takeaway, obviously, for some of you, depending on which country you are selling to, you might want to be aware of the human rights, other ESG considerations that your consumers may care about and what is associated with your brand. And you're probably thinking, oh, China, we will move away from there because it's a bit compromised in terms of the human rights, cotton, things like that. But every country has their challenges. This is not a China problem. Even in Malaysia, Dyson has had problems with some of its suppliers in Johor. Not to pick on any one company, but just my takeaway is that no matter what country you are sourcing from, you still, as importer of record, still need to do your evidence collection, still need to do your due diligence, just to understand your supply chain. You understand your second tier, third tier supplies, that visibility in order to protect your brand into Europe, into the USA. Let's of Japan. No surprise, it's a big red for Japan. That is, every sourcing ship going back to Japan are Japanese owned, and we understand that's the nature of that culture and the way that country is. Philippines obviously is challenged in different ways, and let's just keep on moving on and thinking about different industries. As I said, electronics does dominate, and there's the country of origin industry type. Of course, the US dominates in the countries, but then, as I said, there's only 8 companies that I have counted that have actually closed up in China, right? And only half of them were USA. The fifth one, Harley Davidson, I said they never ever got to manufacture in China in the first place. So let's just have a look at some of my other conclusions. The reasons for the moving out of China. This is something you take away as importer of record, and that is the following. And we can think about issues from China, issues from the USA, incentives from the moving country. These are all push and pull factors that different brand names, depending on which industry, have considered. And these have just come out in terms of a content analysis of all of the quotations that we have actually gathered. We're talking about over 650 source articles that we have looked at, including annual reports of these companies. And you can see issues from the USA dominate, as well as incentives from the receiving country. Obviously, various countries around the world are competing for these sourcing shifts. No surprise about that. Issues from China are still there, and we understand the increase in labour. The increase in labour costs in China has been going up for over a decade now. We know that there's always been a challenge. Your suppliers in China have always given you that challenge. After the first order, you may have got a first order at a very nice price when you went to Alibaba, when you went to Global Sources, but on the second order and the third order, you're probably scratching your head. Why did the price go up? Well, obviously, a lot of suppliers may want to lock you in, and then they'll get their margins out of the second, third, and fourth order. These are different strategies that you need to be aware of when you're sourcing from countries where the wages are rising. And for that matter, in all of these countries that I've talked about, the wages are going up. So these things to keep in mind that many of you are probably already aware of. Now, one thing I want to take home is my academic analysis, and that is, can we predict why these companies are moving to a different country? And based on initial analysis, the move to Vietnam is dominated on the green areas in terms of how much percent of capacity am I moving, and the availability of raw materials, and my global footprint. Whereas the move to Taiwan or Mexico was predominantly moved by USA-owned companies. If we talk about India, a lot of it was due to the scope to improve the supply chain, and much less whether the company was US-owned or not. And so, horses for courses, there are different reasons for going to these different countries in this region of the world. And I think for buyers that start to look to sourcing outside of China, the details in this project can give you great insights as to the advantages and disadvantages of thinking about, if you want to think about Vietnam for the first time, or India for the first time, or Mexico for the first time. And for many of you in the audience, this is probably something you've started thinking about for the first time. China's always been the safe bet to go to, and now you're probably thinking, well, maybe we need to source from a second country, or maybe we need to have an alternative for a new product line that I'm developing. And then, like what a backpack manufacturer was doing in China, they had 4 lines of backpacks, and their strategy was, well, we want to try and diversify our risk because of different challenges in China caused by the geopolitical risk. For our 5th line, because we're going to have to start from square one with a particular supplier or a factory, we will source that 5th line from a contract manufacturer in Vietnam. And that's a likely strategy that I see a lot of SMEs doing. Rather than closing down established lines they have in China, it's about when they're doing their expansion, they're thinking about, okay, what is going to be my expansion country that I want to source from? And that's a big takeaway I want to share with you this evening from Malaysia, this morning from USA and Europe. Even in Europe too. All right. Finally, the extent of moving out of China. As I said, there are few cases where we closed up shop in China. Most of them were a percentage shift, and a lot of these companies are growing, so in some ways their China footprint is not getting smaller, although in the footwear area we noticed that Puma, Adidas, Nike, their footprint in China did go down, because on average they had over 30% of their sourcing from China. On average, they have moved that down by 10%, down to around 20%, and actually grown their footprint in Vietnam by that same amount. But it's not all beers and skittles. Even if you are a large multinational, as Adidas found out in the middle of last year when Vietnam was locked down for 2 to 3 months, and Adidas lost over $800 million there because it couldn't manufacture various lines of its footwear. And so, all of these countries are challenged in different ways under these COVID times. Some of the big takeaways I want to share with you, if you're an SME, you're sourcing for the first time. Number one, yes, you can consider looking to a second country for a new line that you may be sourcing, and that's something you want to experiment with as you are expanding. And at the same time, you also want to consider, no matter what you do, to always focus on doubling up, tripling down on your communications, not only with the supplier, but with the merchandiser that you're working with, or the third-party inspection company that you are working with. This is the criticality of your communications with your supply chain is just even greater under these border closures in this area of the world. I just want to leave Global Sources and this evening's presentation with you, and happy to take questions. Thank you, Megla, for letting me share the stage.
Thank you so much, Dr. Neil. That was very insightful. I'm just going to remove your slides from here. So everybody watching,